Marcus Hill never thought love would find him again. At 34, he was a man who wore his scars like armor. A mechanic from Atlanta, his hands were stained with grease, his back hardened from long hours under broken-down cars, and his heart, well, that was harder to fix than any transmission. Divorce had left him bitter. His ex-wife had walked away 2 years earlier, and since then Marcus had built walls higher than the stacks of tires in his shop. On the surface, he looked like he had moved on. He worked 12-hour days, kept his bills paid, and even cracked jokes with the guys at the garage. But behind closed doors, loneliness pressed down on him like the Georgia summer heat. Nights stretched long and empty. He ate dinner alone, scrolled through his phone without purpose, and sometimes sat in silence until the sound of his own heartbeat became unbearable. Friends tried to push him forward. They reminded him he was still young, still had a life to live. But Marcus always brushed them off. "Man, you can't spend every night in that garage," his buddy Leon said one Friday night, beer in hand. "You're acting like the world ended just because she left you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You don't know what it's like to have your trust shattered. I gave her everything, and she tossed me out like trash." Leon shook his head. "Not every woman is your ex. You keep shutting yourself off, you'll end up old and bitter, talking to carburetors instead of people." The jab earned a reluctant laugh from Marcus, but inside, he knew Leon was right. He was tired of the silence, tired of acting like it didn't bother him. Somewhere deep down, Marcus still wanted what everyone else seemed to have: a partner, someone to share life's quiet moments with. It was a rainy Tuesday when Marcus finally caved. Sitting in his small apartment with the TV droning in the background, he downloaded a dating app. At first, he hated himself for it. It felt desperate, like admitting he couldn't find someone the old-fashioned way. But curiosity kept him swiping. Most profiles blurred together: forced smiles, vague bios, promises of long walks on the beach. None of it felt real, until he saw her. Jasmine Carter, 29. A smile that lit up the screen, eyes that looked both playful and kind. Her bio was short but genuine. "I love books, I laugh too loud, and I make the best sweet potato pie in Atlanta. Don't fight me on that." Something about her words stopped him cold. She didn't sound like she was trying too hard. She sounded like someone who lived life with joy. On impulse, Marcus sent a message. "I don't know about your pie, but I can fix your car if it breaks down. That's a fair trade, right?" To his surprise, she responded within minutes. "Only if you don't charge me garage rates." From that moment, their conversations flowed. They joked, teased, shared stories about growing up in Georgia, about favorite foods and family. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he wasn't dragging himself through a conversation. He laughed, genuinely laughed at her wit. She asked questions about his work, and unlike others, she didn't make him feel small for being a mechanic. As days turned into weeks of chatting, Marcus began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The kind of hope that made his chest ache, reminding him he was still alive, still capable of wanting more. But with hope came fear. He caught himself staring at their messages late at night, wondering if he was ready. Could he really trust someone again? Could he risk opening the door to his heart, knowing how badly it had been slammed before? Still, when Jasmine suggested they meet for dinner, Marcus agreed. The thought scared him, but the idea of saying no scared him even more. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. Something real. On the night of the date, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, straightening his shirt for the third time. His reflection looked back at him, broad shoulders, tired eyes, the weight of the past heavy in his expression. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of anticipation. He muttered to himself, "Don't screw this up, Hill." For the first time in years, he felt the spark of possibility. He didn't know it yet, but the decision to meet Jasmine Carter would change everything, forever. Jasmine Carter knew how to light up a room. At 29, she had the kind of presence that made people look twice, not because she was loud or demanding attention, but because her laughter carried like music and her eyes held warmth that drew people in. She worked at a small boutique in downtown Atlanta, folding dresses, chatting with customers, and helping women find confidence in clothes they never thought they could wear. To most, she was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all together. But beneath the bright exterior, Jasmine lived with a truth she could never escape. She was transgender. To the world she had built around herself, Jasmine was simply Jasmine, a woman who loved books, baking, and Sunday afternoons in the park with her dog. Yet behind closed doors, she wrestled with fear. Every new friendship, every new encounter carried the weight of a question. When do I tell them? Will they still see me the same way? It wasn't shame. Jasmine had fought too hard for her identity to feel shame. But she knew the world wasn't always kind. She had seen what happened to women like her. Headlines about violence. Whispered stories in her community. Some survived the rejection. Others didn't. Still, Jasmine refused to live in hiding. If I want something real, she told herself often, I can't build it on lies. Honesty was her compass, even if it sometimes pointed her into dangerous waters. One evening, as she sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through Marcus's latest messages, her best friend Keisha sprawled on the floor, painting her toenails. They had been friends since college, sisters by choice. Keisha was one of the few people who knew Jasmine's whole story. He's funny, Jasmine said, grinning at her phone. He makes me laugh. Not just the polite kind of laugh. The real kind. Keisha glanced up. That's good. Lord knows you've had enough of the wrong ones. Jasmine's smile faded slightly. Yeah, but I can't keep chatting forever. If I want this to mean something, I have to tell him. Keisha set the polish aside and gave her a look. Girl, you barely know this man. You don't owe him your life story on the first date. It's not my life story. It's who I am. If I wait too long, it'll feel like I lied. And I'm not going back to that. Her voice cracked just enough to remind Keisha of what had happened before. The boyfriend who'd stormed out when Jasmine told him, calling her every name in the book. The one who spread rumors that left her isolated for months. Jasmine had survived it, but the scars were still there. Keisha's tone softened. You're braver than most. But be careful. Not everybody can handle truth the way you want them to. Jasmine nodded, staring at Marcus's profile picture glowing on her screen. His smile looked genuine. His words had never been cruel. She wanted to believe he was different. The next day at work, Jasmine caught herself daydreaming between customers. She imagined what dinner might feel like with Marcus. The clink of silverware, the nervous jokes, the way his eyes might soften when he looked at her. For years she had feared being truly seen. Now she longed for it. But the fear lingered, an unwelcome shadow. She thought of the news stories again. Young women attacked after revealing their truth, some never making it home. She thought of her mother, who had once begged her to just keep it quiet. Yet Jasmine had never been built for silence. I'd rather risk heartbreak, she whispered to herself, than live half a life. That night, as she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress for the upcoming date, she studied her reflection. She saw the curve of her smile, the strength in her eyes, the woman she had fought so hard to become. For a long moment, she pressed her palms against the vanity, her breath steadying. This is me, she said softly, as though reminding herself. And he deserves to know me. When her phone buzzed with a new message from Marcus. Can't wait for tomorrow. Been a long time since I felt this excited. Her heart fluttered. She typed back quickly, fingers trembling. Me too. Tomorrow can't come soon enough. Behind her reply was a promise to herself. She would tell him. She would give Marcus the truth, even if it shattered the fragile hope she carried. Because in her mind, love wasn't worth having if it couldn't survive honesty. As Jasmine slipped into bed that night, her thoughts raced. She pictured his reaction, maybe surprise, maybe confusion, maybe even acceptance. She let herself imagine, just for a moment, that Marcus might be the one who didn't flinch. But deep inside, a quiet fear whispered another possibility. What if the truth didn't just cost her the chance at love? What if it cost her everything? The night air in Atlanta carried a soft warmth, the kind that lingered even after the sun had slipped behind the skyline. The restaurant Jasmine chose wasn't fancy, but it had charm, brick walls, low golden lights, the hum of conversation filling the space. Couples leaned close across wooden tables, laughter rising above the clinking of silverware. It was the kind of place where first dates felt both casual and significant. Marcus arrived early. He sat stiffly at the table near the window, tugging at the collar of his shirt as though it were strangling him. His palms were damp. He hadn't been on a date since before his divorce, and the weight of that fact pressed on him now. He tried to distract himself by watching passers-by on the sidewalk, but every glance at the door sent his stomach flipping. Then she walked in. Jasmine, in a soft blue dress, hair falling in waves around her shoulders, carried herself with a quiet confidence. For Marcus, it was as if the air shifted. She smiled when she spotted him, and the tension in his chest eased. "Marcus?" she asked, her voice warm, musical. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Yeah, that's me. Jasmine." She laughed softly. "The one and only." They shook hands, a formality that immediately felt silly, and when she sat down across from him, the awkwardness melted into something gentler. The server brought menus, but they hardly looked at them. Conversation flowed easily, childhood stories, funny moments at work, favorite foods. Marcus found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, in a way he hadn't in years. Jasmine teased him about his habit of tapping the table when he got excited. He joked about her overconfidence in her sweet potato pie. "You'll have to prove that someday," he said, pointing a fork at her. "Oh, I plan to," she shot back, eyes glinting. For a while, it felt perfect. The noise of the restaurant faded, and Marcus thought to himself, maybe Leon was right. Maybe this isn't the end of me. Maybe this is a beginning. But Jasmine carried a weight he couldn't see. Beneath her smile, her heart raced with the decision she had already made. If this was going to be real, she couldn't wait. She wouldn't build something on silence. Tonight, she would tell him. It happened after the entrees arrived, when their laughter softened into a lull. Jasmine set down her fork and took a breath. Her hands trembled slightly, and she folded them in her lap to steady herself. "Marcus," she began carefully, "I need to tell you something. And I'm telling you because I want to be honest with you, not because I want to hurt you." He frowned slightly, his fork pausing midair. "Okay." She exhaled slowly, meeting his eyes. "I'm transgender. I didn't want to hide it from you. You deserve to know who I am." For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The golden light of the restaurant dimmed in Marcus's eyes. His smile vanished. His jaw tightened, and he set his fork down hard against the plate. "Wait, what?" His voice was low, sharp. Jasmine swallowed, her throat dry. "I know it's a lot. I believe honesty is the only way forward. If we're going to keep seeing each other, you should know the truth." Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "So what? You've been lying to me this whole time. Playing me." "No," Jasmine said quickly, her voice trembling but steady. "I told you now because I want to give us a chance. I wanted you to see me, not just my past." His breathing quickened, anger clouding his face. "You let me sit here, talking, laughing, thinking this was real. And then you drop this." "It is real," Jasmine whispered. "I'm still the woman you've been talking to. Nothing about tonight changes who I am." But to Marcus, everything had changed. His chest felt tight, his mind racing. Betrayal, humiliation, confusion. He couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He glanced around the restaurant, suddenly hyper-aware of the people at nearby tables, the idea that they might be watching, laughing at him. "You should have told me before I even sat down," he muttered, his voice harsh. "You don't spring this on a man like it's dessert." Jasmine's eyes welled, but she held her ground. "I didn't want to lead you on. That's why I'm telling you now. I trusted you with this because I thought you might be different." Her words cut deeper than she intended. Marcus's pride flared. Different. Better. For years he'd felt like less than a man, less than worthy, and now he heard those old wounds tearing open. He pushed his chair back suddenly, the legs scraping against the floor. Other diners glanced over as he stood, fists clenched at his sides. "I need some air," he snapped, storming out before Jasmine could respond. She sat frozen, heart pounding, the stares of strangers pressing against her. She had done what she promised herself she would. She told the truth. But the truth had landed like a grenade, shattering the fragile hope of the evening. Jasmine gathered her things quickly, blinking back tears as she left money on the table. She followed Marcus outside into the humid Atlanta night, determined to try one more time to make him understand. The restaurant door swung shut behind her, the glow of safety replaced by the dim street lights and the heavy silence of the parking lot. She called out softly, "Marcus, wait, please." He turned, his face dark, storm written in his eyes. And in that moment, the night was no longer just a first date. It was a collision course with fate. The night had grown heavier, the Atlanta air thick with humidity and the faint hum of street traffic in the distance. The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, but just a few steps into the parking lot, the world seemed colder, emptier. Jasmine followed Marcus out, her heels clicking against the pavement, her breath quick and uneven. "Marcus, please," she called again, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be honest." Marcus spun around, his face twisted in anger. Under the yellow wash of the streetlight, his eyes burned. "Honest? You call this honest? You sat there smiling, letting me think I finally found something real, and then you tell me." He broke off, his hands curling into fists. "You tricked me. You made a fool out of me." Jasmine stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "I never tricked you. Everything I said, everything I shared, it was real. The laughter, the connection, that was me, Marcus. I told you tonight because I wanted to give you the truth before we went any further." But her words did nothing to calm him. They only fueled the storm raging inside. Marcus's chest heaved, his pride screaming louder than her plea. He thought of his friends, the guys at the garage, their rough jokes and sideways glances if they ever found out. In his mind, the weight of humiliation was unbearable. "You should have told me before I ever picked you up," he snapped, pacing like a caged animal. "You don't drop something like that halfway through dinner. You don't let a man sit there thinking. He cut himself off, the words choking in his throat. Jasmine clasped her hands together, desperate. "I was scared, Marcus. Do you understand that? Do you know what it's like to carry something that people have killed women like me for? I trusted you. That's why I told you." For a flicker of a moment, her words seemed to land. Marcus hesitated, his jaw slackening just slightly. But then the image of himself sitting at that table, smiling like a fool, crashed back into his mind. And with it came rage. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice rose, echoing across the empty lot. "You embarrassed me. You lied by leaving it out. You put me in this position." "No," Jasmine said firmly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I gave you the truth. You just don't want it." Her defiance hit him like a spark to gasoline. His face hardened, his breathing quickened, and before Jasmine could take another step back, Marcus lunged. He grabbed her arm, yanking her close, his voice a guttural growl. "You made me into a joke," he spat. "Marcus, stop, please," Jasmine cried, struggling to free herself. Her purse slipped from her shoulder, spilling onto the pavement. The sound of lipstick tubes and keys clattering echoed into the night. A couple walking to their car in the far corner froze, watching from a distance. They heard the shouting, saw the fury in Marcus's stance, but hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Later, one of them would tell police, "We thought it was just a fight." But his voice was pure hate. Jasmine pushed against him, her voice trembling but loud. "I trusted you. I gave you a chance to see me for who I am. You don't get to take that and twist it into shame." Her words only deepened the crack in his pride. His hand struck out, an open palm, sharp against her cheek. The sound reverberated, sharp and final. Jasmine stumbled, her back hitting the hood of a parked car. For a split second, silence fell. Marcus stared at his own hand as though it belonged to someone else, chest rising and falling like a drumbeat. Jasmine's eyes widened, fear and disbelief mingling with sorrow. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, clutching the edge of the car for balance. "Please, Marcus. You can walk away." But Marcus couldn't hear her anymore. All he heard was the roar of his own wounded pride, the pounding voice in his head screaming that he'd been made a fool, that he had to take back control. In a blur of fury, he struck again. The night swallowed Jasmine's cry, her body collapsing onto the asphalt. Her phone skittered across the pavement, screen glowing faintly before going dark. The couple in the distance gasped, fumbling for their phones to call 911, but by then, the damage was done. Marcus stood over Jasmine, his breath ragged, his hands trembling as though he couldn't quite believe what he had done. The parking lot was silent now, except for the hum of a nearby street lamp and the pounding of his heart in his ears. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just stared at her still form, the reality of what had happened sinking in like ice water. Then, without a word, he turned and walked quickly to his car. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as he sped out of the lot, leaving Jasmine behind in the glow of the streetlight. The first date was over, and so was Jasmine Carter's chance at tomorrow. Marcus drove into the night with his hands locked tight on the steering wheel, his breath ragged, his knuckles still burning from the impact. The city lights blurred past, but he barely saw them. All he could hear was Jasmine's voice echoing in his head, pleading, trembling, defiant. "You don't have to do this. The words struck him harder than the roar of his engine. For a moment he felt sick, as if the air had been sucked out of the car. He pressed harder on the gas, as though outrunning the sound, the memory, the sight of her collapsing in the glow of that street lamp. When he pulled into his apartment complex, the silence became unbearable. He sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at his trembling hands. They didn't look like his own. The grease-stained mechanic's hands he knew so well had become something else, tools of destruction. He flexed his fingers, half expecting to wake up from a nightmare, but reality clung to him like a weight pressing down on his chest. Inside his apartment, Marcus paced the living room, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. He poured a glass of whiskey, but it shook so badly in his grip that half of it spilled onto the carpet. He sank into the couch, head in his hands, whispering to the empty room. She should have told me sooner. She made me do this. But even as the words left his lips, they rang hollow. The truth was unshakable. Jasmine had told him. She had trusted him. And now she was gone. The night dragged on, each tick of the clock carving deeper into his conscience. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the world was already closing in. Dawn crept slowly over Atlanta, painting the sky in pale streaks of pink and gray. The streets were quiet, the city still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. In the parking lot outside the small restaurant, silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of a street lamp that had burned through the night. It was a jogger who found her. He was a middle-aged man, earbuds in, sweat dripping down his temples as he rounded the corner. At first, he thought the figure on the ground was a bundle of discarded clothes, maybe a jacket someone had dropped. But as he drew closer, the truth hit him like a fist. He froze, breath caught in his throat. "Dear God," he whispered, pulling the earbuds out. Jasmine lay crumpled against the cracked pavement, her dress rumpled, her purse scattered beside her like an unfinished story. The faint glow of her phone screen had died hours earlier. Her stillness was unbearable. The jogger fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed 911. "There's a woman. She's not moving. Please, send someone fast." Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the lot. Patrol cars pulled up, doors swung open, and officers approached cautiously. One knelt beside Jasmine, checking for any sign of life. His jaw tightened as he shook his head. "Time of death likely overnight," he muttered. Detective Carla Monroe arrived shortly after, her trench coat pulled tight against the morning chill. A seasoned investigator in her 40s, she had seen her share of tragedies, but something about this scene struck her harder than usual. Maybe it was the way Jasmine's hands were curled as if mid-plea, or the way her spilled belongings told the story of a night that had started with hope. Monroe crouched beside the body, studying the bruising on Jasmine's cheek. The blood dried at the corner of her mouth. "This wasn't random," she said quietly to her partner. "This was personal. Someone wanted to hurt her." Officers began taping off the area, their radios crackling with updates. Restaurant staff arrived, their shock evident as they realized the laughter-filled dinner service, just hours earlier, had ended in horror. One waitress, her apron still tied around her waist, covered her mouth with both hands, whispering. She was just here. She was smiling. The news traveled fast. By mid-morning, local outlets were already broadcasting. Young woman found dead outside Atlanta restaurant. The camera crew zoomed in on the yellow crime scene tape, the chalk outline forming around Jasmine's still body. At her boutique job, co-workers broke down in tears. "Jasmine was the heart of this place," one said to reporters. "She always lifted everyone else up. How could this happen to her?" Her best friend Keisha collapsed when she heard. She rushed to the scene, demanding answers, her voice hoarse with grief. "She was my sister. She was just trying to live her life." "Why her?" Officers held her back gently, promising they would find the truth. Detective Monroe watched it all unfold, her expression carved from stone. She knew the stakes. She knew how quickly cases like this could vanish into silence if people didn't care enough. But as she scanned the faces of the crowd, some tearful, some curious, some judgmental, she recognized the other challenge. The secret at the heart of Jasmine's life would soon be public. And once it was, she feared the narrative would twist. Still, Monroe made a silent vow. "I'll find who did this. She deserves that much." By late afternoon, the medical examiner confirmed what Monroe already suspected. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. The brutality suggested rage, not accident. As Jasmine's body was loaded gently into the coroner's van, a hush fell over the crowd. Keisha pressed her hands against the glass of the vehicle, whispering through tears, "I'm so sorry. You just wanted love." That night, candles flickered on the sidewalk outside the boutique where Jasmine had worked. Friends gathered, holding photos of her smiling face. A choir sang softly, voices breaking with sorrow. One sign read, "Her truth cost her life. Justice for Jasmine." Atlanta had seen violence before, but this felt different. It was intimate, ugly, a reminder of the dangers faced by women like Jasmine who dared to live openly. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Hill sat in silence, his clothes still stained, his hands trembling. He didn't know it yet, but the net was already closing around him. For Detective Monroe, the case had just begun. But for Jasmine, the story was over far too soon. Detective Carla Monroe stood in the center of the crime scene, arms folded, her eyes sharp as she scanned the parking lot. The sun was higher now, and traffic had returned to the streets. But for her, the world was narrowed to a handful of clues scattered across the pavement. Jasmine's phone, cracked and lifeless. Her purse overturned, lipstick tubes and keys glinting in the morning light. A smear of blood on the hood of a parked car. Monroe had worked homicide for over a decade. She knew the signs of a crime of passion. The violence wasn't calculated. It was sudden, explosive, personal. Whoever did this hadn't come here to rob or stalk. They came here with Jasmine, and they left without her. "Run the cameras," she told her partner, Detective O'Donnell, nodding toward the restaurant. Somebody saw them leave together. By noon, the grainy footage from the restaurant's security cameras confirmed her instincts. Marcus Hill's face appeared clearly, broad-shouldered, restless, shifting in his seat during dinner. The video showed him and Jasmine walking out together, their expressions starkly different. Hers cautious, his dark with anger. Monroe leaned closer to the screen, her jaw tightening. "That's our guy." Witnesses filled in the blanks. A waitress remembered how the mood between them changed suddenly. At first they were laughing, she told Monroe, twisting her apron nervously. But then she told him something. I don't know what, but his face changed. Like a storm rolled in. Another couple, the ones who had seen the fight from the far corner of the lot, gave even more damning testimony. He was shouting at her, the woman said. We couldn't hear every word, but the tone, it was ugly. Then he hit her. We saw it. Monroe nodded grimly, jotting notes. And then, he left, the witness continued. Got in his car and sped out. She collapsed. We called 911 right after. With the timeline established, the investigation moved fast. Marcus Hill was no stranger to the system. 2 DUIs on record, a bar fight years earlier, but nothing like this. His address was easy to pull. His car, a beat-up gray sedan, matched the description on camera. By the evening, Monroe and her team rolled up to his apartment complex. The building was plain, its bricks weathered, laundry fluttering from balconies. She climbed the narrow stairs, her badge heavy around her neck, and knocked sharply. It took a long minute before Marcus opened the door. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, as though he hadn't slept. Monroe didn't miss the faint red mark on his knuckles. Marcus Hill, she asked, voice firm. Yeah, who's asking? His tone was defensive, already on edge. Detective Carla Monroe, Atlanta PD. We need to ask you a few questions about last night. Marcus stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Monroe's gaze was unflinching. You were seen leaving a restaurant with Jasmine Carter. Witnesses place you at the scene where she was killed. Care to explain? For a moment, Marcus froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Then he shook his head, scoffing. Killed. I don't know anything about that. We had dinner, that's all. Dinner. Monroe raised a brow. Because witnesses heard shouting. They saw you put your hands on her. They saw you drive away while she lay bleeding. Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes darting past her as if searching for an escape. She lied to me, he muttered, voice low. What lie? Monroe pressed. His answer came in a rush, anger bursting through his thin restraint. She wasn't who she said she was. She told me she was different. You don't spring that on a man. You don't sit there smiling, making him think he's got something real. Then, he stopped himself, breathing heavy. Monroe's eyes narrowed. His words weren't just an excuse. They were a confession in disguise. She could see it in his trembling hands, in the sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus Hill, you are under arrest for the murder of Jasmine Carter, she said, stepping forward as officers closed in. What? No, you don't understand. Marcus backed away, panic flashing in his eyes. She should have told me sooner. I wouldn't have. But his protests were drowned out by the metallic snap of handcuffs locking around his wrists. As they led him down the stairwell, neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked doors. Some whispered, some shook their heads. Marcus, once just another mechanic living in the complex, was now a man accused of murder. At the precinct, Monroe sat across from him in the interrogation room. The walls were bare, the fluorescent lights harsh. Marcus slumped in the chair, eyes bloodshot, his bravado slipping. You don't get it, he said again, voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. She lied. She made me. No, Monroe cut him off sharply. She told you the truth. You chose what to do with it. And now she's dead. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus dropped his gaze to the table, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what he'd done. For Detective Monroe, the case was moving quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. She knew prosecutors would want to make this trial about more than just one man's rage. They would want it to speak to the value of Jasmine's life. And Monroe, looking across the table at Marcus Hill, silently promised Jasmine's memory she would not let him twist the truth. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood tall against the morning sun, its stone facade casting long shadows across the square. Reporters clustered on the steps, microphones in hand, cameras flashing as spectators filed inside. The trial of Marcus Hill had drawn national attention, not only because of the violence, but because of what it represented. The brutal killing of a transgender woman, Jasmine Carter, after an evening that began as a hopeful first date. For many, the case was about more than Marcus. It was a test of whether Jasmine's life would be given the same weight, the same justice, as anyone else's. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with tension. Rows of wooden benches were filled with townspeople, activists holding quiet vigils, and curious onlookers. Jasmine's family sat in the front row, her mother clutching a folded handkerchief, her best friend Keisha at her side. Across the aisle, Marcus sat at the defense table in a gray suit, hands cuffed loosely in front of him. His face was expressionless, but his eyes betrayed a restless energy, darting toward the jury, toward the floor, anywhere but the grieving faces before him. The prosecution wasted no time laying the case bare. Assistant District Attorney Michael Evans, a sharp-featured man with a voice that cut through the silence, stood before the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about choice. Jasmine Carter chose honesty. She sat across from Marcus Hill at dinner and told him her truth. And Marcus Hill chose violence. He chose to turn that truth into rage, and in that rage, he stole her life. He gestured toward Jasmine's family. This trial is not about confusion. It is not about deception. It is about accountability. The defense countered with a different narrative. Marcus's attorney, a seasoned litigator named Richard Donnelly, painted Marcus as a man blindsided, humiliated, provoked beyond reason. My client is not a monster, Donnelly insisted, pacing before the jury. He was a man confronted with information that struck at the core of his identity. His reaction, while tragic, was not premeditated murder. It was the heat of passion. The law recognizes such provocation. The courtroom became a battlefield of words and emotions. Witnesses took the stand, each testimony adding layers to the picture of that night. The waitress who had served them described the sudden shift in mood at their table. At first, they were laughing, like they'd known each other forever, she said, voice trembling. Then she leaned in, told him something, and his face just changed. I'll never forget it. It was like the light went out. The couple from the parking lot recounted what they had seen. The woman clasped her hands tightly as she spoke. We heard yelling. He was furious, shouting about being lied to. Then he hit her. She stumbled, and he hit her again. She fell, and he just walked away. Her partner nodded beside her. There was no mistaking it. He left her there. Detective Carla Monroe testified with calm authority. She laid out the evidence methodically. The security footage showing Marcus leaving with Jasmine, the bruises consistent with the witness accounts, Marcus's own words during interrogation. He said, and I quote, "She should have told me sooner. I wouldn't have done it if she had." That is not the voice of a man claiming innocence. That is the voice of a man admitting guilt and shifting blame onto the victim. When Jasmine's mother took the stand, The courtroom held its breath. Her voice wavered, but her words carried a weight that silenced every whisper. My daughter was more than a secret. She was light. She was kindness. She fought every day to live as herself, to live honestly. And for that, she was killed. Don't let anyone tell you she brought this on herself. She deserved to live. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks, and many in the gallery wept with her. The defense tried to humanize Marcus. He took the stand, his voice unsteady but his anger simmering beneath the surface. I didn't plan this, he said, staring at the jury. I thought I finally had someone who was real. Then she tells me something like that, out of nowhere. You don't do that to a man. I snapped. I didn't mean to kill her. His words sent a ripple through the courtroom. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at him with thinly veiled disgust. For Jasmine's family, his testimony was salt in the wound, an attempt to paint their daughter's honesty as provocation. Prosecutor Evans rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. Mr. Hill, you admit she told you the truth? Marcus hesitated. She told me, yeah. And you admit you hit her? Marcus's jaw tightened. I lost control. Evans leaned closer. No, Mr. Hill. You didn't lose control. You made a choice. You chose to turn honesty into violence. And Jasmine Carter paid with her life. The words echoed in the silent room. Marcus shifted, his bravado fading. For the first time, he looked small, swallowed by the enormity of his actions. Outside the courthouse, protests and vigils grew each day. Signs read justice for Jasmine and her truth, her life. Activists argued that the trial was about more than Marcus Hill. It was about whether the justice system would acknowledge the humanity of a transgender woman, about whether her life mattered as much as anyone else's. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments brought the case to its peak. Evans stood before the jury, his voice unwavering. Jasmine Carter did not die because she lied. She died because she told the truth. Do not let Marcus Hill's rage erase that. Do not let prejudice masquerade as provocation. Give Jasmine the justice she was denied in life. Donnelly countered, appealing to emotion. My client is guilty of being human. He reacted poorly, yes. But is it murder? Or is it the tragic result of a man pushed beyond his limits? The jury listened, faces grim, weighing the arguments, the evidence, the raw emotion. When the judge dismissed them to deliberate, the room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath for weeks. Jasmine's mother clutched Keisha's hand, whispering a prayer. Hours stretched into a day. The city held its breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine not just Marcus Hill's fate, but the legacy of Jasmine Carter's short life. The jury filed back into the courtroom after nearly 12 hours of deliberation. Their faces were somber, eyes fixed ahead, each step heavy with the knowledge that their decision would change lives. The room, packed wall to wall, fell into silence. Not even the rustle of fabric or the scrape of shoes dared to disturb the moment. Marcus Hill sat at the defense table, his hands clenched together, knuckles white. He tried to keep his expression steady, but his jaw worked nervously. His attorney leaned close, whispering. Something meant to reassure, but Marcus's eyes flickered toward the jury box, searching desperately for mercy. On the other side of the aisle, Jasmine's family held their breath. Her mother clutched Keisha's hand so tightly their fingers turned pale. Keisha whispered under her breath, a prayer that justice would not slip away as it so often did for women like Jasmine. All rise, the bailiff commanded. The judge entered, his black robe sweeping as he took his seat. He glanced at the jury, then at the room, before nodding. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, rose slowly. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of everything that had been heard over the past weeks. We have, Your Honor. The clerk stepped forward, unfolded the paper, and began to read. In the matter of the state of Georgia versus Marcus Hill, on the charge of second-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Gasps filled the courtroom, followed by the sound of muffled sobs. Jasmine's mother collapsed against Keisha, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Thank you, God. Thank you." Her grief and relief mingled in equal measure, raw and unrestrained. Marcus's head dropped into his hands. For a moment, he shook silently, not with tears, but with disbelief. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Marcus shoved it away, his voice hoarse and bitter. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She should have told me sooner. None of this would have happened." The words landed like poison, drawing sharp glances from the gallery. Even in defeat, he refused to accept responsibility. The judge's gavel struck once, commanding silence. "Mr. Hill, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. This court recognizes that every life carries equal weight under the law. Prejudice is not provocation. You will be sentenced at a later date, but today, justice has spoken." Reporters rushed from the room to deliver the news, their cameras flashing as they shouted into microphones. Outside, the crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in chants for broader justice. Candles flickered in vigil, signs lifted high. Justice for Jasmine, and her truth, her life. Inside, the courtroom emptied slowly, people whispering about what the verdict meant. For Jasmine's family, it was a bittersweet victory. Nothing could bring her back, but at least her death had not been dismissed, her truth not erased. Detective Carla Monroe stood in the back, arms folded, watching it all. For weeks, she had carried the weight of this case, determined not to let Jasmine's story become another forgotten headline. As she saw Jasmine's mother weeping with both devastation and relief, Monroe felt her chest tighten. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was something quieter, heavier. Justice, yes, but justice that came too late. Marcus was led from the courtroom in shackles, his face pale, his steps dragging. The clang of the handcuffs echoed through the chamber, the sound of finality. He glanced back once, eyes sweeping over the benches, but there was no sympathy waiting for him. Only grief, anger, and the unshakable truth of what he had done. The trial was over, but Jasmine's story had only just begun to ripple outward. Her name, her courage, her decision to live honestly, even in the face of danger, would not be forgotten. The courthouse steps were crowded long after the verdict was read. The autumn evening air carried the sound of chants, the glow of candles flickering against poster boards bearing Jasmine's smile. Strangers who had never met her stood shoulder to shoulder, voices rising together. Justice for Jasmine. Justice for all. Her mother stood at the center, wrapped in Keisha's arm, her tears still fresh but her voice steady when reporters pushed microphones toward her. "My daughter was more than what happened to her," she said firmly. "She was joy. She was love. She deserved to live her truth without fear." Today, the jury recognized that. But tomorrow, we still have to fight so no other family goes through this. The word spread quickly, clipped and shared across news outlets and social media. Overnight, Jasmine's name became a rallying cry. Some called her brave, others tragic, but to those who knew her best, she was simply Jasmine, the friend who laughed too loudly, who baked pies that won over anyone who doubted, who dreamed of finding a love that would last. Detective Carla Monroe watched the vigil from the edge of the crowd. She hadn't come for cameras or recognition. She came because she couldn't let go of the weight Jasmine's case had placed on her heart. In her years on the force, she had seen violence in all its forms, but this one had struck deeper. It wasn't just about one man's rage. It was about a society that told him his rage was justified. As the choir began to sing softly, Monroe closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered Jasmine's body on the pavement, the fear frozen in her expression, and she remembered Marcus in the interrogation room, still clinging to his pride even as the truth closed in around him. It reminded her how fragile justice could be, how often it depended not on right and wrong, but on whether people chose to see someone's humanity. Across town, Marcus sat in a holding cell, his hands pressed to his face. The echoes of the gavel still rang in his ears. He told himself over and over that he hadn't meant for it to go that far, that he had just snapped. But deep down, where excuses couldn't reach, he knew the truth. He had made a choice. He chose anger over compassion, pride over understanding, violence over love. For Jasmine's community, the verdict brought no comfort, only resolve. Vigils spread beyond Atlanta, candlelit gatherings in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. Activists spoke Jasmine's name at rallies, reminding crowds that her story was not isolated. She had joined a tragic list of women whose lives were cut short not by accident, but by hate. Keisha returned often to Jasmine's grave, a simple stone now surrounded by flowers, letters, and photographs. She would kneel there, voice trembling as she whispered into the quiet. You just wanted to love and be loved. I promise you, they will remember you. Jasmine's story forced conversations in households and workplaces, some uncomfortable, some overdue. It challenged people to confront what it meant to truly value another human being's life, even when it didn't fit neatly into their expectations. For older churchgoers who had never spoken the word transgender aloud, for young people who feared telling the truth about themselves, for lawmakers watching the case unfold, it was no longer just an abstract idea. It had a name, a face, and a grave too soon filled. In the weeks that followed, Detective Monroe filed her reports, closed the case, and moved on to the next. But Jasmine stayed with her. On quiet nights, she thought about how Jasmine had chosen honesty even though it scared her, how she had walked into that restaurant with hope and walked out into violence. Monroe told herself she would carry that memory as a reminder, that justice was not only about catching killers, but about fighting the silence that allowed hate to grow. One evening, weeks after the sentencing, Monroe drove past the boutique where Jasmine had worked. The storefront window was decorated for the holidays, but in the corner sat a framed photograph of Jasmine, her smile bright, surrounded by candles that customers had placed there. Monroe pulled her car to the curb and sat quietly for a long time. She whispered into the stillness, as though Jasmine could hear her. You weren't erased. You mattered. And in that moment, though the city around her kept moving, Monroe felt the smallest measure of peace. Jasmine's story was over, but her truth would outlive the violence that tried to silence her.